I'm glad you're here, because that means you like one of the most scaled buggies Tamiya has ever produced, and you and I have got that in common. I've added timestamps for those that need it, because I'm not going to be able to make this video without first acknowledging some of the great builds I've seen over the years, which inspired me to have a go at this myself. You may know I've got a soft spot for the Wild One, and the FAV is pretty much the same buggy, but the theory is it lends itself to be more customizable. Well, so I thought until I paused for a moment and actually took a closer look at what people have built. None of this will be a surprise to you if you are a member of the Tamiya Club or some of the Tamiya Facebook groups, but for those that aren't, feast your eyes on these. I can tell you a little bit about this one because it belongs to one of my best mates, Josh. He made an alloy body shell together with a roof panel, and perhaps I'll do a standalone video on this because he's all about period correct hop-ups. But for now, let's take a look at Jeff's customised Wild One. I know Jeff through the Facebook group specifically for the Wild One and Fast Attack vehicle. The level of detail he put in is impressive and includes a customised driver figure which really personalises his build. I reached out to a few people about their builds in the Facebook group, and connecting with people who share the same passion not only motivates but inspires you with the added benefit of being able to pick up tips and ideas along the way. So the Wild One and the FAV are great platforms to create scale realism. But unless you've got the skill and time to create your own custom driver figure like Jeff did, the FAV kit comes with a detailed hard plastic driver out the box. So perhaps this does give it an edge over the Wild One. And let's not forget the hood is also hard plastic opposed to Lexan, and this can give you different options regarding painting and adding scale props. The custom builds that always stood out to me have painted chassis and roll cages. If you drive the buggy, you do run the risk of paint chipping, and more likely in the event of a rollover, paint flaking off the roll cage when it flexes. So for my build, I decided to play it safe by mixing and matching parts that I collected. I've taken my time with this build, and I may not have the level of model building skills some hobbyists have, but I'm still loving how it turned out, and over time I can always add extra scale pieces to take it up a notch. So let's take a closer look at my build from the initial ideas to how it ended up. This project has taken longer than I care to admit. I finished painting the driver and then decided on a completely different colour scheme. That alone took ages waiting for the enamel paint to dry before I could do the next stage, and by then I often ended up having something else I needed to do outside of the hobby. As an alternative to painting the chassis, my first idea was to use a chassis sticker like they use on the Blockhead Wild One, and as I had an unbuilt kit at the time, I traced the chassis sticker using a technique I picked up at school to create a template. I knew I wanted to paint the hood matte white, and my plan was to match the colour on the chassis. So I picked up a matte white vinyl sticker sheet from my crafty friend Kim. She's not crafty, but she's into crafts. And she's also got a silly sense of humour. But after painting the hood, I didn't think they matched very well, so I scrapped that idea. I'll keep my template though in case I make another one. In the end, I added some decals to the chassis from a defective Wild One MCI sticker sheet which I picked up cheap. It had a print bleed on some decals, but I only wanted to use the numbers and some sponsor stickers, and they looked okay. I also bought a letter sticker sheet from eBay and added FAV to emulate the original decals, but in the colour that I wanted to match the shark mouth parts. The roll cage is nylon, and I wish Tamiya would sell it separately in plain white so we could dye it ourselves. Nylon is the only plastic that you can dye, and it's easy to do with something like RIT dye, but ideally you need to start with white so it absorbs the colour that you want it to be. As mentioned, painting the roll cage was my biggest concern, so I decided to mix and match the parts. Although Jeff tells me that using etch primer does give great results when painting the chassis and the roll cage, so that sounds like a good excuse to make another one with a more adventurous colour scheme. Wanting to create a sandrail buggy instead of the military look, I used the black Wild One chassis together with FAV shark mouth parts, such as wheels, nerf bars, gearbox plate, storage box, and whatever this piece is called at the top of the roll cage that stiffens everything up. Originally I used the black roll cage, as you can see here, with it sitting on my shelf in a prominent position to motivate me to get it finished. But in the end I swapped it out for the Blockhead version, which actually matched the shark mouth parts perfectly, and I think it helped tie it all together. When it came to the shark mouth front wheels, there was a fair amount of slop, so to fix this I used Tamiya Shims. I put a 0.3 and a 0.1 on each side, and that seems to do the job. It was a couple of years ago when I bought the front tyres on eBay. They're not vintage but brand new, and just like the tyres from the 80s, so this seller must have been printing them. I have tried to buy more, but the listings unfortunately ended. It was up for ages and I got complacent thinking that they'd always be available, and now I'm kicking myself for not buying more. I have since messaged them but without reply. Maybe if a few of us message him they'll become available, usable. As mentioned, I painted the hood in matte white and then covered it with flat lacquer for protection. The colour scheme is pretty toned down, but it works with black, grey, white and a splash of red, and I'm happy with how this has turned out. Let me walk you through the rest of the build, including the upgrades and mods that I've done. Starting inside the chassis, I had an issue finding the right place to put the ESC so it would fit under the driver, and this was the spot that worked best without having to cut anything away. I did consider cutting out this section and filling the hole with the top part that I'd cut out, which would have given me plenty of room and allowed the wires to run directly to the motor. But all that was extra work I fortunately avoided. I used some tape to stick the switch here, allowing me access underneath, and although it doesn't protrude as far out as the Tamiya switch would, it works fine. I recently picked up a Technigold motor to pair with the Hobbywing 1060 ESC and made some longer motor wires to reach. The re-release FAV and Wild ones have the hole in the chassis, so when using modern day larger capacity batteries, you can run the cables outside the buggy, but I didn't want to do that. I cut away part of the chassis here to give more space for the power leads. Although I did cut away a little bit too much, because the driver actually restricts it quite a bit. Different batteries are different sizes, and I can easily fit a 3,500 NIM in here, but I wanted a longer runtime, so I bought these. These are lipos and have a smaller footprint compared to the NIM equivalent, and although they fit the Wild one, the FAV battery door is less forgiving, so I couldn't get them to fit. I will be able to use these in my other Tamiyas though, so all is not lost. If you've seen my Wild One video, I did find out about a battery which should fit from Pete Wiley, but unfortunately that's not available at the moment. I have found something similar which I ordered recently, so when that arrives, we'll have to see if it fits. It has the same footprint and I'll update you when I get it so we can check that out to see if it works. If it does, I'll get you some running footage too. You might notice I'm using the Wild One shock stays on this build with G-made shocks. The rear shocks are a pretty tight fit and they look like they clear okay, but the true test will be when I run it. As most of the weight is in the back of this buggy, I've added stiff springs in the rear and added a little bit of weight up front which should improve the steering and traction. These adhesive wheel weights are used on real cars when you get a tyre change, and a local garage was kind enough to give these to me, but you can also buy them cheap online. I'm totally guessing how much weight to use, but I'm sure it's going to help. I have added spotlights front and rear which came as a 4-lamp set with white LEDs. I used Tamiya self-tapping screws to attach the front lights together with an alloy spacer as they were too long. Ideally you're better off finding some 2.5mm screws that are long enough to secure them, as the ones in the kit are a little bit too short. For the rear lights I used screws provided in the kit. They could have done with being a little bit longer, so I may have to swap them out too. Although I'll probably just forget about it and carry on unless there's a problem. As all the LEDs are white, I was going to paint the rear LEDs red as well as the lenses, but I didn't have any transparent paint or a Sharpie pen to do it with. I remembered I had some tail light repair tape, so I added 2 layers of that to each of the lenses and that seems to do the job okay. Oh, I also decided to glue the light grills on, as every time I picked up the buggy they just kept falling off. To tidy up the wires, I bought some 4mm braided cable sleeving. It is plastic and not totally flexible, but good enough for this job, but I would have preferred the fabric type, if that makes any sense. It expands enough to push over the top of the LED bulb, but you do have to feed it over carefully, and once in place, I painted some liquid heat shrink to tidy up the ends, as I didn't have any heat shrink that was large enough to push over the bulbs. I bought this gearbox guard only to find out it wouldn't fit. You'll see here that they have since changed the design, adding a hole to make it work, but I decided to file mine down as the alloy is very thick, so there's plenty of room to remove some material, and now it fits fine. I'm running an old high-tech servo with the kit servo saver and steering rods. I was going to install my favourite go-to, the SPT space-saving servo, but I just fancied using this old one. You are supposed to trim the edges off the rod ends to stop them binding on the shocks when steering, but I don't plan to use these. Making them to the length in the manual means that they only held on by a few threads, so I ordered these instead. They're 19mm long, giving an extra 3mm to thread onto the steering rods. Now they feel secure and there's no bump steer, so worked out well. I installed this 86mm long rear shock brace. I bought this years ago, but you can still buy these just from a different brand. I actually bought it thinking it was to go between the front shock stays, and when it didn't fit, I realised it was for the rear. So I ended up making my own brace for the front, using an M3 threaded alloy bar. The closest length I could get for what I wanted was 100mm, and I needed it really to be 104mm, so I added a 2mm alloy spacer on either side. I'll link all these little parts in the description in case it helps. You can get them in different sizes and colours to match whatever project or colour scheme that you want to do. I also used two 5mm alloy spacers when I mounted the shocks. Here's a good tip if you don't know it already. When it comes to the driver, I've seen people lose his left arm after gluing it in place because the arm is hollow and you can only apply glue around the edges. So I filled in his arm with putty and then drilled a hole inside so I could screw it on, which will make it more secure. You can see I drilled twice as I struggled to get the screwdriver in for the first hole. The other benefit is you can lift his arm, which gives you better access to this screw if you ever need to undo it. This number plate was using a piece of plastic that my SIM card came in, but these days they don't seem to do this anymore. What they give you is much smaller, but you can buy a sheet of 1mm styrene, which is cheap on eBay, and make up a few of them in whatever shape and colour you fancy. I didn't have another number 4 sticker in the same font, so we're flying the Tamiya flag instead. The only other thing I've done is to put a carbon fibre sticker on top here just to break up the grey. And if you found this useful or entertaining, you can support more content by using the Buy Me a Coffee link or affiliate links in the description. Thanks for watching.